Hello, I'm Jeff Cook, and I welcome you to another segment pertaining to that of God and country. Thus far in my interaction with you, I have tried to expose and relay to you the importance of knowing our history, knowing our heritage, and that of even our birthright. For our history, I believe it has been corrupted and it has been contaminated. For there are those who have tried to revise it in order for it to fit their own personal and political agenda. They are called revisionists. They have changed, they have edited, they have redacted what doesn't fit their narrative or their ideology. So it's very important to know our history in order that we may combat such heresy that is flowing today throughout our higher learning of institutions. They have indoctrinated and infiltrated the minds of our children, so we are the ones that must stand up and speak the truth of that of our founding. But I have also endeavored to disclose to you the truth concerning our past and our heritage for the simple reason that we no longer know who we are as Americans. And there are those who try to shame us for being proud of the fact that we are Americans. And there are those who would rather fly another flag instead of the stars and stripes, which puzzles me greatly. And there are those who look back at our forefathers and our founding fathers with much disdain and despisement. And we are no longer cognizant of the fact that our political happiness and liberty rests solely upon the foundation, and I say foundation, of religion and morality, the Christian religion, and the morality which is produced forth from that religion. You know, George Washington once said, of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, he says that it is religion and morality which are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars. So our first president, George Washington, said the two great pillars of our nation that produces political prosperity and happiness, they are actually religion and morality. And he even goes on to say that if you try to subvert or undermine or destroy these pillars, then you are not a patriot. Very strong words. So it's important for us to know our history. It's important for us to know the truth of our heritage and our birthright. Even though many today, as in the words of Jack Nicholson in the movie A Few Good Men, you can't handle the truth, there are those out there that cannot handle the truth of who we are and what we are about as Americans. So with that being said, did you know the following? That God himself commands and admonishes us and even his own people to know their history and their heritage, that they were not to forget their history. The Bible says in Deuteronomy 32:7, he says to remember the days of old. He says, consider the years of many generations. Ask thy father, and he will show thee, thy elders, and they will tell thee. They were called upon and commanded to always reflect and remember their past and their history. Hosea 4:6 says, my people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge. But what knowledge is he talking about? They are destroyed for the lack of wisdom, destroyed for their lack of understanding or intelligence towards God and concerning God. They are lacking understanding concerning his word, his principles, and his precepts, and their past, their heritage, and their history. For many times, if you read the story of the children of Israel, whenever they would forget who they were with God, they would follow other strange gods. So therefore, he says, my people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge. Now that's God commanding and admonishing his people to not forget, that they should know their history, that they should remember their history, that they should know their past, that they should know and understand his principles and his precepts. But not only did God command us and admonish us to remember our history, but our founding fathers believed that not only they themselves should know their history, and that they did, they were intelligent men, but they believed also that future generations should know their past as well. Listen to what they said concerning this matter. Daniel Webster once said he was a lawyer, a statesman, and he was known as the defender of the Constitution. But listen to what he says about history. He says, history is God's providence in human affairs. History is God's providence in human affairs. History is tied to God himself because history is actually his story. But not only did Daniel Webster say that, but listen to what James Wilson says. Now, he was a member of the First Continental Congress of 1774, and he was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. And he was an original Chief Justice appointed by President George Washington. But listen to what he says. Law and liberty cannot rationally become the objects of our love unless they first become the objects of our knowledge. Law and liberty, are they the objects of our knowledge? For he says they cannot be the objects of our love unless they first become the objects of our knowledge. Once again, Noah Webster, he was a father of education, schoolmaster of our great republic. He molded the intellectual character of the American people. In fact, his books educated 4 generations. And he's also considered part of the Trinity of Fame concerning our nation, speaking of that of Noah Webster. You have Columbus, the founder, you have George Washington, the father of our country, and then you have Noah Webster, the father of our education. But Noah Webster said something like this: every child in America should be acquainted with his country. He should read books that furnish him with ideas that will be useful to him in life and in practice, he says. As soon as he opens his lips, he should rehearse the history of his own country. So Noah Webster, the father of education, says as soon as that child is able to open his lips, he should rehearse the history of his own country. Now, as I close today, let me quote Dr. David Ramsey for you. He's one of my favorite historians. He was a physician out of South Carolina, and he fought also in the Revolutionary War. And he has a great book of the life of George Washington, which was published in 1807, and which I have, and I love it greatly. But this is one of my favorite quotes from Dr. David Ramsey. He says that ignorance is the enemy of liberty, and it is the nurse of despotism. Did you catch that? Ignorance, the lack of knowledge, the lack of wisdom, it is the enemy of liberty, and it nurses despotism, or it nurses tyranny, if you will. So he's saying the lack of knowledge concerning God himself. You have a lack of knowledge concerning his principles and his laws, which produces freedom and liberty. If we are ignorant of these facts, it is the enemy of liberty. Then there's the lack of knowledge concerning our history and our founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, and the Bill of Rights. That if we are ignorant of these things, it will nurse despotism, and it will be the enemy of liberty. Our ignorance and lack of knowledge nurses and gives strength to despotism and tyrants. I read a quote the other day from Joe Biden, who is running for president, and he said no ordinary American cares about his constitutional rights. Well, if I may say with all sincerity and frankness today, Mr. Joe Biden, there are many Christians today and many patriots. We care about our constitutional rights because we are aware and well informed and educated who we are as Americans and what our rights stand for. So yes, we are very much aware of our rights and we do care about them. But David Ramsey says that if we are ignorant, it is the enemy of liberty, and it will nurse despotism or tyrants like that of Joe Biden in what he said. You know, as I close today, if I could humbly suggest the following. I believe every church should know and teach our godly heritage. Not only should the church itself wave the banner of liberty, but I believe that every church and pastor should raise the sword of liberty as well. You see, we must not forget that our liberty was first birthed from the church. It was birthed from the pulpit itself. Reverend Jonathan Mayhew, in his message in 1750, he preached a message pertaining to this. He said, rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. He said, rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. And then also, we must not forget that not only was the banner waved of liberty throughout the church and the pulpit, but our first national seal carried this same message, that rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. You see, the very day that Congress approved the Declaration of Independence, Congress also appointed a committee to draw up the new seal for the United States, which represents the spirit of the states themselves. Now, on this committee, there was John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin. And they came up with a seal, a draft, if you will, that was approved. And do you know what it was? Within this round seal, there were the words of Reverend Jonathan Mayhew. Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. That was part of this seal. And then what the adopted picture for this seal was Pharaoh and the Egyptians in the Red Sea drowning. And there was a pillar of fire in a cloud representing God's divine providence and protection. And Moses and Israel was on the other shore. You see, the seed of liberty was planted by the church, planted by the pastors, that rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. And I pray that every church would somehow not be fearful of the political persuasion that may be sweltering the church, but speak the truth. Speak who we are as a people. Fill our people with knowledge concerning the Constitution, the Declaration, and our Bill of Rights. I'm asking all pastors to do this, but also not only the church itself and the pastors. I think about the families, moms and dads and grandparents. You know, you may not have the depth of history as some may have, but yet there are some things that you can do to plant within your children and in your grandchildren. You can take time with them and teach them that they are to love God and to love their country, that they are to love our flag, that there should be a love and admiration for those who served and died for liberty. You know, Clarence Carson once said, he was a historian, and he said concerning the founding fathers that these were some of the greatest men to ever grace the American scene. You can teach that to your children. You can teach them the Pledge of Allegiance again. Instill something within your children about the history of our nation, about our past. You see, it's up to us to teach. and to train that which is coming after us for future generations. As we close today, I thank you for being with us for God and Country. Next week, I am going to endeavor to speak to you about some of our founders, who they were, what they were about, and just delve a little bit into their lives. Thank you so much. Come back and be with us next time.